The Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act, introduced by Tom Emmer originally in 2023, now being reintroduced again in 2025. There's quite a bit of momentum behind this bill getting passed. The way that I read it, and we should go into it in a bit more detail, is that all of the stuff that happened with Tornado Cash and various mixers would essentially be shut down. This entire process where we had developers being sued for developing blockchain services or blockchain mechanisms, particularly ones that were intended to enhance privacy. There's a whole swath of people that got caught up in this, that got arrested. There have been prosecutions that are happening. All of that would essentially go away if what Tom Emmer is proposing with the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act goes through. Lucas, I know this is kind of the first time you've had a chance to take a look at this in recent days, but initial thoughts on this? I'm very positive on this. I think it's good. I'm a little shaky on some of the definitions of how they defined blockchain, but that being set aside, as long as it gets into a good form in its final form, I think the spirit of it's in a really good place. So I'll throw it on the screen here and we can take a look at it.
I mean, I'm certainly for I'm certainly more for developers and people who make tools not to be treated not to be treated as criminals, for there to be a line separating the use of the tools that they create from what they've actually created. I know we have a phrase, a parlance that developers love to invoke. Code is law. Code is law. Help me out here. Where they reference the protections of the First Amendment Act, or the First Amendment. So I think that we should be gladdened to see a separation between programs that are written, between tools that are made, and those people who might be using them nefariously.
Yeah, it kind of comes down to this whole whether people that engage in blockchain development should be considered money transmitters. This is the thing that a bunch of people got tripped up on, because blockchains in some way are transmitters of value. And this is it's a shaky thing to try to say that a developer is responsible for this. And one of the reasons that the Tornado Cash guys got caught up in this is because they started running centralized services, and they were a part of taking fees, and they were a place to go to get access to this thing in a way that was easier. Then when you start tripping some of these lines, it ceases to be something you developed and something that you put into the metaverse, the world of programming and computers and interactions and whatever. And it became something that was being run as a business by some small amount of individuals. And I think that this might not save those people that engage in that type of activity, because this really tries to get to the heart of it, that if you develop this thing and you put out a smart contract that lives on the blockchain, and I'm thinking about something like Tibet Swap. So if you think of something like Uniswap or Tibet Swap, where you have the ability to exchange and it's fully automated, and it's something that sort of floated this little boat out into the stream and you no longer have control of it. That is, I think, what this is intended to help clarify, is that sort of activity will never be money transmission, and that it isn't something that you can be prosecuted for. Now, if you were to take something like Uniswap and put a really cool front end on it and say, this is the super cool Uniswap, and it had a whole bunch of great UI features, and for that you took a fee for helping to facilitate all of that and to pay for the development of it, and there were a whole bunch of other things around it, I think you'd have less clear defense under this type of bill. So there are certain activities that I think squarely fall inside the safe harbor provisions that are written into this bill that you could still run afoul of it. But I think that there's a lot of activity that's been happening where people have started to get a little fearful that if they're engaging in this or they're doing it, that they're going to be prosecuted by the feds or that they're going to be picked up for it. That I think will go away if Emmer gets what he's hoping for, and looks like there's some positive news that it's passed some hurdles. I'll throw that on the screen as well.
Well, and I'm very happy to see a law that begins to rein in what sort of latitude a regulatory body like the SEC has. And I think you're right to point out that that some of the services that are provided by people who are using blockchain, using crypto, might or probably will still fall under the eye and the regulation of the SEC. And I'm actually thinking of you mentioned the Tornado Cash developer Roman Storm, the ongoing trial that he's in the middle of right now. The actual trial has been going on. I don't know if you've been watching that, but I'm also thinking about in the wake of the Torres XRP decision, whenever several actual blockchain developers were sent letters and called into the SEC. I forget who all was called in, but I know one was the developer of the Solana blockchain, Tolly, and I forget what came out from that, but it was quite chilling for someone to have created a blockchain and totally on that information alone to be called into scrutiny as to what liability they had or what criminality what criminality they were engaged in merely for creating a blockchain. So yay that there's some clarity here, but I also worry is the takeaway from this act going to be that all blockchains are for money transmitting?
I don't think that that's what this. I don't think this bill says that particularly. What this bill says is that there's safe harbor provision for certain type of activities, and that you can't be classified as doing a certain type of activity, that being money transmission, because you develop something. And that's where I think even if this bill had been in place, I'm not sure that it would have protected Roman Storm and the rest of his crew, because they engaged in certain type of activities that probably wouldn't have protected them. So I think if developers and people want to create things like this, they still have to be pretty wary and understanding of what the entire landscape of the financial crimes networks and laws exist. Because if you're developing something that is inherently about doing something like mixing, and it's primarily engaging in the L1 token or something that is perceived or generally accepted to have a monetary to be a monetary instrument, you're going to have a problem with that. I don't think it's saying that all blockchains are inherently transmitting money, because they don't have to. Certainly you could have a blockchain that didn't have really anything to do with money, because that technology as a general concept doesn't require it to be somehow engaged in stable coins or money creation or anything like that. So I don't really think that this law is going to make all blockchains money transmission vehicles inherently, at least not the way I read it.
I mean, I still can't get past also that it's the Securities Exchange Commission, and money is not a security. And I think about the privilege of contract guaranteed to citizens of these United States or the several United States, and I wonder at what point that distinction is going to be admitted by the federal government, by the Securities Exchange Commission. And we saw in the still pending Stable Genius Act with regarding stable coins, how very interested the federal government was in trying to restrict the stable coins, the backing of various stable coins directly to the dollar, which is a money, and it is a money that is in control of the federal government. But as they try to make a distinction between what sort of transmissions or what sort of what sort of understanding or possibilities there are in the contracts that are made between various parties via this great communicator, this great transmitter we have, the internet. I don't. I think they might be. It might be a losing battle for them and those who are deigned to be persons of interest or entities of interest. So, yay that Tom Emmer is trying to restrain the scope of the SEC, but I wish that scope was being directed towards um, their jurisdiction to be limited to securities that are founded on the dollar.
Trying to understand exactly the distinction here. So it's like you're saying you would have preferred that it got reined in even further and said that this has to be stuff that is specifically stable coins or their ilk, something that has a direct tie to the dollar in some fashion, and that is how you would restrict it and make it clarify what money is.
Well, I think I mean in some part, what is money? Money is the denominator of agreement between two people, and if the money that is being used by people is the dollar, then that gives the government some sort of interest in what's occurring. But as we begin to see more and more monies that are on the scene, and we have more sophisticated communication that they may or may not be able to, that they may not have access to, maybe should they have access to it? Should they have access to communication? Uh, I don't believe so. I think that we have an idea of privacy and contracts that can exist between two people. And for the government to be coming in and saying, oh, you can't engage in this type of communication is leaving the bounds of securities. And securities are financial products that are based in the dollar. And that the legitimacy of the Securities and Exchange Commission for existing comes with a relationship between the United States and the dollar. That the we did not have a central bank in the United States when it was founded. Even the Federal Reserve and the United States dollar um, is somewhat amorphous in their relationship. I mean, we talk about the Federal Reserve as if it's a central bank, and yet it's not a central bank. It's a private money that has been given a monopoly by the federal government, and that was to circumvent the explicit rules that are written into the Constitution denying the federal government uh, from providing from making its own money. And so this is sort of the workaround that we've engaged in. Well, we should think about why the federal government was denied the ability to have its own money, and also to think about, I mean, the SEC doesn't come into existence until the 1930s. And when I think about the revolution that cryptography brought, to the private sector and why the government was so keen on keeping it out of the hands of the private sector was because they wanted to maintain their control on the communication that existed between people. And so
Well,
again, I
let's go back for a second, because I'm thinking you got me thinking a little bit about what blockchains are providing and what the fundamental tokens really operate as. Some people have said that Bitcoin is a commodity, and there was a lot of discussion about ensuring that your blockchain was sufficiently decentralized and that you could classify it as a commodity and that it wasn't a currency. There was a lot of movement in that direction when the Howey test was the gold standard and everybody was very concerned about tripping certain laws. And then XRP resolved and that thing's been ripping. And now we sort of don't have this same focus on trying to ensure that things are commodities and staying out of the hands of the SEC. I hear you loud and clear about this. What is money? This more fundamental question, because a token that's exchanged on some blockchain in exchange for providing the security of that chain, is it fundamentally some kind of currency, even though it might have value in the eyes of some, that it might trade against other things in some way? It certainly wouldn't rise to the level of money in more canonical senses. I, that really does bring up some good points, I think, as to what even is the definition of a money, and how could blockchain L1 tokens really ever be considered money in most senses, because they just, even though they might have value, having value doesn't make something money. Just because, I make a shovel and somebody is willing to pay me for it doesn't make the shovel money.
well, and I think in some ways about how in some ways churches are able to operate outside of the dollar system, and I say that because they are in some churches more than others repositories of trust. But if someone makes a handshake deal to swap a piece of land for a car, or um, uh, whatever whatever they are exchanging, if they make it a handshake deal and then they have to turn around and report on their taxes, and they say, well, what was the value in dollars of the land? What was the value of the car? If they look at each other and say $1, then what recourse does the government have to turn around and say, wait a second, no, the fair market value of the land was $30,000, and the fair market value of the car was $35,000. And I think that gets really sticky. That's the government setting a price on everything, and inserting itself in exchanges between private individuals. That may have been relegated at one time to churches, but now with these technological tools that provide trust in an exchange, and don't and are not forced to operate in the denominator or the terms of the federal money, the dollar. um, I wonder, how is that going to work? And
Well,
are
we
we?
have a little bit of that going on within the government regardless, because we have land taxes, and they have to have a mechanism to say what the land is worth and how much tax you should be paying on it based on the value of the land or the buildings or whatever, right? I mean, isn't don't we already have a fair amount of the government engaging in that kind of practice?
I mean, yes, a valid point, and they get to go out and to assess the value of the land. They also assess values on real property, and in sometimes even personal property, and they tax you on those things. But that's different uh, than a sales tax on on the transmission or the exchange of those items.
Well, the reason that was coming to my mind is when you said, if I'm going to swap a car for some piece of land, and that land has some assessed value. I mean, I don't know that there's that many places in the United States, at least, that don't have land taxes. Perhaps there are a few, but it's pretty commonplace in most of these United States that if you own a piece of land, you're going to pay an annual tax on it. And so it would be hard for that particular example, but I could certainly see where you're going with it if you had some other type of thing for which the government has less of a vested interest in it. Cars and land seem to be the thing that governments care more about almost than anything else. So likely this one's maybe a bad example, but maybe a shovel and some
Well,
heirloom jewelry or something.
I think it's a great example. Jewelry is also a good example because what is the actual value of jewelry that but when it comes to, well, one, if you have a piece of land and you sell it for dramatically less than the government says that it is, you actually come under scrutiny. I I once sold a piece of land to a friend for a great deal, and that was it. I just I had a spare lot that I didn't have much in plan for. But when I sold that to him for well under market value, the county called me up and they wanted to know all the details about that sale, and they had questions about what might have occurred also. That was a little bit
Oh,
chilling.
as if there was some other type of compensation that was on the side that wasn't listed. So how did it resolve? I'm curious. Did they let it go through? Did the purchase price become the assessed value of the property?
No, no, of course not. They assessed the, well, yes, it went through. When it went through, I answered all of their questions. I never heard from them again, and I somewhat told the county assessor the the particulars of the deal are my relationship between uh, my friend who I sold the property to, et cetera, et cetera. But I also think that's very interesting when it comes to how we assess the value uh, of land and of property. And no, the property of the land was not reflected in the sale of it, but that did. I actually heard from my neighbors a little bit of groaning. I shouldn't say a little bit of groaning, just comments that, oh, this will affect the value of my house because instead of selling a lot for $100,000, it was substantially less, and so that affected the comparables and what the value assessments were. But I should say that their fears were not well founded, as the value of all of all of our houses and all of our land was always increasing. It went up regardless, as with no. I guess maybe that was the value of that sale, or that data point was just thrown out altogether, because we continued to pay higher and higher taxes every year after that. But um, this it is interesting to think about how the government does assess the value of the items, and how they run everything through the dollar. I think a lot about in Australia. Well, one, the government goes out and sends someone to assess the value of our homes and of our property. That's what the county tax assessor does. Um, in Australia, it may not still be so, but at one time, people actually assess the value of their own houses and their own property, real property. But the thing that the government could do was come and buy it at the price that they appraised it at. So if the government thought that people were assessing the value of their homes as too low, they would go and buy it and resell it on the market. Um,
It does bring up a good point with respect to blockchains and tokens that are exchanged on these networks, because this comes up when you see certain prices for certain types of crypto, and you start thinking about how much could you actually sell at that price. I mean, maybe the last trade was at 25 cents, but if you started to dump hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars worth of those tokens on the market, there would be no depth of buyers, and so you would quickly bottom out. So the real question is, if you were holding X amount of those tokens, and the last sale was for 25 cents, but the market depth is, I don't know, $500. Do you have billions of dollars worth of tokens? Could you really be assessed on it? Could you be taxed on it in some fashion? That this is much more complex sort of financial discussions around what's really going on here. And I think that's why many people thought the only real way to do this correctly is to say exiting to the currency of the specific jurisdiction is when any type of tax or money transmission might be effectuated, because it's the only time that ever even makes sense. So like if
Well,
I sell a bunch of a token and I get $700 for it and I've made some increase, well, then maybe the tax man cometh, at that point and only at that point.
well, you're describing exactly the quandary that Roger Ver has found himself in, determining when he relinquished his United States citizenship. He was supposed to pay taxes on his assets that he had accrued. It's like a divorce, a divorce from the United States of America, and he was supposed to pay taxes on all of his Bitcoin. And he said, what is the actual value of my Bitcoin? And here is the exchange rate that Bitcoin is at, but I have so much that it would dramatically affect the price of Bitcoin. And so he hired sophisticated accountants and tax experts to figure out what he owed in taxes. But later the government came back and said, "Oh, no, 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 you didn't pay enough." So he has also been at the whims of the government in determining what the value of his property was. And again, I think that this is I think this is the desecration of the intent of the limitation of the powers of the federal government, and for them to presume to determine what their value is, and to press that on to citizens of the United States. Roger Ver could have given that big, he did. He gave Ross Ulbricht a fair amount of Bitcoin after he was after he was pardoned. Did he have to pay taxes on that at the going rate of Bitcoin if it was a gift? And I mean, the federal government also does set thresholds for the amount of dollars that people can give. But when it comes to what is the value of gift, I think too about the art market and NFTs, and how what the real value of art in the world. Well, that's an agreement between oftentimes incredibly rich people who are fighting over maybe not so good art. A banana gray taped to a poster board, and how much is that supposed to be worth? Not that much to me. But going back to the legislation, I see also something that's interesting here is the transmission aspect of it, because the federal government presumes the jurisdiction of both the dollar, but also of transmission. So when I think about the possibility of encrypted messages, and I wonder how much can the government read our signal messages? Can the government do they always have an interest in breaking into communication of those people who reside in the government? And I think if we begin to think about blockchain in terms of communication, and hold it up next to our expectations of communication in emails, or in messaging, or in our homes, talking from face to face, our idea of what is permissible for the government has changed dramatically since 9/11.
And the reason you're bringing this up is because you're saying that inherently inside of any transmission is the underlying concept of a message, or this idea that we would be doing something where there's the conveyance of value. And in times past, this always had to be physical because we had a mandate in the Constitution that said money is gold and silver. And so if you're moving value around, you're going to be putting gold and silver in a stagecoach or on the railroad and moving it around in some fashion. But that's not how we move money around now. We do it via some sort of message. And so if the government has purview over money transmission, then it inherently is involved in communications in some sense.
Yes, and I also think about the post office. The post office is the only is it the only federal, maybe the only federal bureaucracy that's written into the Constitution. But the reason for the post office was given to for the government to disseminate political information, and this is why senators and representatives have franking privileges, and they don't have to they don't have to pay for postage. But think about how interested the government was from not allowing uh, uh, me, mail services that were in the private sector, federal FedEx and UPS, and how they had to piggyback on some sort uh, uh, of uh, of notion that they were delivering parcels, that they were delivering boxes that couldn't fit in the mailboxes of the federal system. But in reality, what the federal government wanted was to be able to go through people's mail. And so, um, you know, the introduction of the internet, of email, of digital communications was as equally threatening to them. But the threat that they feel is again what I see as an expansion of their power, an abuse of the post office system. The post office system was not created so that they had the ability to go and look at people's mail. The post office system was created so that the senators and the representatives and those who wanted to join in the political fray could disseminate their little pamphlets and their flyers. It was about the notion of democracy and how you could ensure that everyone was informed. But for us to make the leap to, oh, the government should be in charge of communication and should have the ability to look into communication is a great leap. And I also think about how post Patriot Act, we live in a world where the federal government and the NSA have achieved the ability to look into many forms of communication, and they do so without a warrant. So now they're acting outside the check of the judicial system, and they oftentimes come across information that they don't have a warrant for. And what they do is they turn around and tell another tell the FBI or tell the police to go look somewhere, go look and see what you find here. And that is done outside the eyes of a judge, outside of proper disclosure in a courtroom. And this is a very dangerous thing for our government to be engaging in, for any government to be engaging in, because um, they get to choose the evidence that they use against you, um, against anyone, and they are very good at picking and choosing that information. So this all again comes back to money. Money is a contract that is transmitted between people, and the SEC was not given. The federal government has never been given the reign of money. There was a reason that it was limited to silver and gold, and it wasn't because of the value or the hardness of the value of silver and gold. It was limited to that because it was outside of their control, because there were mines in Africa, in South America, and all around the world. And so the federal government could never wholly be in control of those metals. And for them, they've long enjoyed the privilege of being in charge of our monetary system, but we need to break. We need to break this notion that we've accepted that is their jurisdiction. We have private monies that are knocking on the door, and we need to begin thinking about what sort of liberty that gives to the citizens of the United States.
All right, and I think that that's all we've got on this topic. We'll definitely be keeping an eye on how far Emmer gets with this. There is the backing of some particular sets of groups that are saying this is a good step in a particular direction. I don't know if I actually threw that on the screen, but I'll put it in the show notes that there's various crypto groups that are supporting it. So we'll keep an eye on it, and we'll see you next time on FOMO.